Welcome back to the channel. This is Ready Storm and you are watching second part of What If Naruto Became Dual Half-Breed. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
8 figures stood around a platform in a dark cave as a plant-like man appeared in the room, alongside a man with gray eyes, spiky auburn hair, and piercings covering his face. The said man turned to face the plant before speaking in a threatening tone. "Where are Hidan and Kakuzu, Zetsu?" Zetsu flinched slightly before responding raspily. "They've left, Leader Sama. To keep their bodies from being used as evidence, I have to devour them." Hearing this, the leader's eyes narrowed. Though he disliked Hidan for his obvious disrespect, he was still useful. And without Kakuzu, they had all these Ryo-filled scrolls but no way to open them. He growled out, gritting his teeth and refraining from throttling Zetsu for devouring Kakuzu's body. What occurred? Zetsu quickly responded to avoid becoming a stain on the bottom of his boot, sensing the killing intent in his words. They were almost finished with the Nibi Jinchuriki when a young boy with blonde hair with red streaks appeared. He slaughtered Kakuzu and ripped Hidan to shreds before stealing the Nibi vessel. The leader's eyes narrowed even more as a result of this. 2 S-rank Nukenins had been defeated by a child. It was absurd, but he knew Zetsu didn't lie. "What else did you notice about the boy, Zetsu?" Aside from his sunny blonde hair, he had emerald pupils and red on the outside. His skin was tanned, and he had 3 whisker marks on his cheek. He was dressed in all black and red. "Whoa. You say whisker marks?" As soon as he heard this, the leader inquired. When he saw Zetsu nod, he thought about it some more. His cheeks have whisker marks. That is the possession mark of a fox demon, and the only fox demon I am familiar with is Kyuubi." A small grin appeared on his lips as he turned to face 2 figures, one nearly 7 feet tall and the other more normal in size. "Your target has been identified, Fugoku. Bring Kisame along to observe and, if possible, capture him." The smaller of the 2 men, with crimson eyes and 3 tomo surrounding a black pupil, nodded with a slight smirk on his face. When Zetsu whispered something in the leader's ear, he motioned for the large blue man with a massive sword on his back to follow him. As Kisame and Fugoku were about to leave the room, he nodded and spoke to them. "But beware. It appears that he has learned Konoha no Kuroi Senko's famed jutsu. Also, according to Zetsu's report, your old friend Itachi and someone named Rayne appear to know him. And, according to what he said, both are stronger than he is, and he is extremely dangerous for killing Kakuzu and effectively ending Hidan's ability to do anything else." When Fugoku heard this, his Sharingan eyes narrowed. When he heard the deserters, he clenched his teeth and turned around, his Sharingan spinning wildly. An energetic teen wearing a spiral orange mask stopped jumping around and looked the leader in the eyes on the other side of the room. As soon as he noticed the crimson eye, the said leader began sweating bullets and realized he needed to get everyone out of here. "Dismissed. Everyone, you know your assignments." Except for the orange-masked teen, the leader, and a blue-haired woman seated on a rock and looking around passively, the Akatsuki members quickly left the room. She looked over at the leader and noticed his worried expression. "Pain, what's the matter?" she inquired, slightly concerned that something was bothering him. After all, he saw himself as a god, and a god should not be concerned. When she turned around to see what he was looking at, she noticed the energetic teen known as Toby, though he didn't appear to be very energetic at the time. Not seeing him as the source of Pain's concern, she looked around for the source of his concern when Toby spoke in a voice that was not his usual playful one, but one of commanding authority. "Pain, contact them again. We can't approach the Kyuubi vessel while she's present." Pain shuddered and used his telepathic abilities to contact the others. The woman simply blinked in confusion, as she had no idea what was going on. After a few more moments of perplexity, realizing that Pain was not going to say anything to her, she returned to Toby and resolved to find out what was going on. "Alright, what the hell is going on here? And what's up with your attitude shift, and why are you telling Pain what to do?" Toby approached her slowly and looked her dead in the eyes with his one visible eye. The blue-haired female stepped back in fear as she noticed a 4-tomo Sharingan spinning wildly at her. "Conan, I'll respond to your question once the others arrive." Conan nodded numbly and scooted over to Pain, unusually frightened by the sight of his Sharingan. It was as if he was looking into her mind through her eyes. Zetsu arrived minutes later, followed by Deidara and Sasori, owing to Sasori's inability to move quickly in his puppet. After about 15 minutes, Fugoku and Kisame arrived, perplexed as to why they had been summoned. Kisame was furious, and Fugoku was furious. Fugoku glared at Pain, his Sharingan spinning madly, while Zetsu examined Toby with interest, knowing what was going to happen. "Speak quickly, because I need to assassinate that traitorous scum I once called a son." Toby stepped up instead of Pain and spoke up in a voice that was unmistakably the one they had heard just moments before. "If you're so desperate to die, go ahead." His Sharingan eyes locked on Toby and he glared at him, eager to get this over with. He was so focused on finding and killing Itachi that he didn't notice Toba's new voice. Toby examined everyone in the room before speaking to them. "As you've probably guessed by now, my name isn't Toby. That's just an alias I use to keep a specific person off my trail. My real name is Uchiha Madara, and I am one of the founders of the Uchiha clan, as well as the strongest shinobi ever, even stronger than the Yondaime Hokage." Fugoku averted his gaze from the young teen in front of him. It was absurd to believe that this boy was the clan's founder. "Secondly, I founded Akatsuki but delegated leadership to Pain in order to keep the same person from discovering me. Fugoku, your death is guaranteed if you pursue the Kyuubi vessel. Rayne is the most powerful entity that has ever existed. She destroyed my original body in order to prevent me from achieving my goal of world dominance." Fugoku's eyes widen as he recalls a woman saving the Shoden and slaying Madara in battle at the Valley of the End. "After she easily defeated me, I realized I couldn't beat her on my own. So I wandered the planet without a body for over 60 years, until I came across Zetsu trying to resurrect a fallen Uchiha, one crushed beneath a boulder. He was successful, but the body lacked soul, allowing me to take over. As a result, my power is nowhere near what it once was, but make no mistake, I am powerful enough to defeat everyone here and survive." The others had to wonder as his story progressed. It wasn't too far-fetched for Orochimaru to claim a new host. "I ran into Pain shortly after my resurrection and defeated him. When I did, I decided to make use of him, making him my subordinate and informing him of my plans. I knew Rayne would come after me if she found out I was still alive, so I used Pain as Akatsuki's figurehead. He gathered the most powerful Nukenin, money, and a mercenary army to aid my plan." Fugoku snorted at Madara, disbelieving everything he said. It didn't help that he hadn't been paying attention for the majority of the time. "HN. You can't possibly be my ancestor and the strong." He was immediately silenced as he was slammed into the cave wall by Madara, who had his throat in his hands. As he noticed the 4-tomo Sharingan spinning at him, Fugoku's skin turned Orochimaru white. But this was not what frightened him. Even the best shinobi feared the fact that his lips were moved and he uttered one word. "Tsukiyomi." Fugoku screamed in agony as his arms and legs flailed around, attempting to break free from the genjutsu. Kisame recoiled in fear and shock, knowing that was a Uchiha-only genjutsu. Madara let go of Fugoku and turned around as the clan's former leader slumped to the ground in a coma. Madara looked around the Akatsuki members with his one visible eye and noticed they were still stunned by what he had done. Before he spoke, a slow smirk appeared on his lips beneath his mask. "Do you have any more questions about me?" The others quickly shook their heads, allowing him to finish his sentence. "Now, as I was saying before I was cut off, I knew I couldn't take over the world on my own. Even the most powerful shinobi would be unable to defeat her. As a result, I knew I needed the power of bijus to bring her down. But I'm not going to use them on her because she can pick them apart, especially now that she has the Kyuubi and Nibi containers. I must resurrect Beliar, the most powerful being ever to exist. His authority was to be limitless. And there is only one way to bring him back to life. You have to reunite all 9 biju around this statue, as this statue is where his heart is sealed so he would never become a threat for humanity again. For the same reason, the 9 biju were born and or created to protect this statue. Rayne defeated Beliar in the past, but it was before he could fully revive and regain his full power. In essence, she was only confronted with 5% of his full power. His total power exceeds that of the 9 bijus combined. And from what I know from the stories, she barely escaped the ordeal alive. Even though she is much more powerful now, she will be no match for him once he is fully resurrected. Except for Pain, who appeared to know everything, all Akatsuki members were still reeling from what he did to Fugoku. They intended to resurrect a being even more powerful than the most powerful biju Kyuubi, which the founder of Akatsuki claims would not be enough to defeat Rayne alone. Sasori was the first to emerge from his thoughts, and he turned to face Madara. "So, what do you require of us?" Madara smirked as the others nodded in agreement to what he said. "Sasori, Deidara. You travel to Sunna to retrieve the Ichibi container. Kisame, since your partner is currently unable to do anything, I'd like you to collect the Yanbi vessel. It shouldn't be a problem because he's just an old man. I want you to look for Sanbi and Gobi, Zetsu. After we've collected all of them, we'll go after the Nibi and Kyuubi containers as a group so that we can compete as one. Pain, you will remain here and serve as the leader until then. Conan, please heal Fugoku as soon as possible." Everyone nodded and turned to leave when Madara spoke up again. "Know this before you leave. We have a spy among us. It could have been Kakuzu or Hidan, but after their deaths, I doubt it. If you discover it is your partner, eliminate them before they reveal any more information. I don't want the Gamma Sennin to know what we're up to. So, unless you're dealing with biju or their vessel, don't let your partner go too far by themselves." As soon as he said this, each Akatsuki member turned to look at each other, and distrust began to grow between them. Everyone nodded and hurried off to their assignments, unless they wanted to end up like Fugoku, who was being dragged off by Conan. Naruto walked down the mansion's wide stone staircase, Yugito close behind. As they continued down, Naruto placed his hand in front of his face to shield his eyes from the sun's rays. "Damn, son, go away already. You're already irritating." He heard Yugito, most likely from his statement, trying to suppress her laughter as he rubbed his eyes in annoyance. Naruto turned around and tilted his head slightly towards her. Yugito backed up after a moment of staring, his red eyes and green pupils catching his attention. "Why are you staring at me like that?" Naruto quickly turned away, a light blush on his face, once he realized what he was doing. Yugito blinked at him in confusion and was now staring at him strangely, trying to figure out why he was blushing. "It's just that you have a nice laugh." Yugito blinked a few times and blushed slightly as she wasn't used to receiving compliments. Thank you very much." Her growling stomach interrupted their bonding once more as it roared, demanding food. Naruto and Yugito couldn't stop laughing as they walked towards the kitchen. As they approached the kitchen, they both noticed a black-haired woman sitting at the bar, reading a book while eating what appeared to be cooked flounder. After a few seconds, Naruto recognized her from the night before as Nibi no Nekomata. Yugito, on the other hand, was intrigued by her identity. She leaned in close to Naruto's shoulder and whispered something into his ear. "Do you recognize this as your Ka-san?" Nibi, with her excellent hearing, easily picked up on what Yugito said and snickered a little. Nibi replied with a slight smile on her face, shaking her head. "No kitten, or should I say cat, I'm your ex-prisoner." Yugito's eyes widened as she took a moment to process the information before running behind Naruto and screamed. "Nibi." Of course, Naruto had no idea what was going on, so he did the only thing he could think of: he sweated. "What are you doing hiding behind me?" Nibi looked at the scene, somewhat surprised and perplexed, as Yugito whimpered in fear. Yugito drew closer to Naruto, hoping that he could protect her from Nib. "She threatened to eat me if she was released." Nibi blinked as she heard this and placed her hand on her chin, obviously thinking because she didn't remember saying that. However, being trapped inside someone for 13 years would do that to you. The memory flashed through her mind as she was thinking, and she snapped her fingers. "Oh, yes. That is something I recall. I believe I was in heat at the time, and I was furious that I didn't have a mail container." Naruto's sweat dropped and he began to back away from Nibi, knowing that cat demons were constantly in and out of heat and had a tendency to mate with the nearest male regardless of race. Nibi's eyes twitched in rage as she glared at him. "I'm not in heat right now, mutt. Besides, I have better control over mine than most." Naruto sighed in relief, as he was certain he didn't want to be made at the age of 10. The other reason he sighed with relief was that he had walked into the kitchen, straight to the cabinet to raid the Pocky stash. Itachi pushed Nibi off the chair and opened the cabinet, pulling out a few dozen boxes of Pocky and cradling them in his arms like a baby. He walked out of the room looking like a kid in a candy store after hugging his Pocky and ignoring the twitching Nibi. She glared at him before shifting her gaze to Naruto, who simply shrugged in response. "Don't bother asking me. Nothing stands in his way of his Pocky." To get to it, he pushed Kyuubi and Ka-san out of the way. I swear he'd kill us if he could have a lifetime supply of it. Of course, this made Nibi twitch even more before storming off to find and most likely beat the hell out of Itachi. Naruto shrugged again, knowing she wouldn't find him, and proceeded to the refrigerator. Before closing the freezer, he opened it and took out 6 18-ounce T-bone steaks. This naturally piqued Yugito's interest in Naruto. Naruto shook his head as he noticed the expression on her face and decided to enlighten her. "You're probably wondering why I got 6 of them, right?" Yugito nodded in agreement as Naruto continued. "Simple really, I'm a Hanyu and I need to eat real food, but as a dhampir I need blood to feed. So I usually eat rare steaks because they have enough blood to quench my thirst and enough food to satisfy my hunger. Plus, once he smells me cooking again, Kyuubi will eat about 3 of them." Yugito nodded, believing him when he spoke up again. "Your steak will be ready in about 30 minutes, so you can do whatever you want, except break anything." Yugito nodded and turned to walk away when she realized she had no idea where she was going. When she looked in the mirror, she saw that she was still wearing the bloody and slightly torn clothes from her fight with Hidan and Kakuzu. She raised her head and turned to face Naruto. Where's the restroom?" Naruto laughed as he shook his head at her response. "There is one directly across from your room, the room you exited, so feel free to use it." Yugito nodded and began walking in that direction. Conan sighed as she looked around in a clearing about 10 miles from the base. They had let her out because, along with Pain and Zetsu, she was the most trusted of the Akatsuki. They also knew not to stop her unless they wanted to face her wrath, which was shown when Kisame tried to spy on her while she was taking a shower. They all learned after that incident to give Conan her own space if they didn't want to end up like Kisame, who had Samahata shove up his ass. Blade first. She sighed again, looking around the clearing as if waiting for someone. I despise waiting for that perverted freak to appear. Someone summoned me.
A voice called out from behind her.
Conan spun around, holding the kunai at the man's throat, who was passively waving his hands at her. Hello, Akira, it's me. Conan glared at him, considering simply killing him, but decided against it as she removed her kunai from the man's throat. No way, Jiraiya-sensei. Also, please do not address me by my full name. You know what would happen if they discovered. Jiraiya gave her a perverse smile before nodding. I'm sorry, but I couldn't help but admire such a beautiful woman as you. Conan had his kunai pointed at a much lower region and spoke in a deadly and serious tone as soon as he finished his sentence. If you ever use me in one of your books, I will castrate you and have a great time doing it. His face was pale, and he nodded in fear, as that was something he hoped would not happen. He became deadly serious when he looked at Akira's face after overcoming his fear of being castrated. So, what happened for you to summon me here so quickly and personally? Conan sighed deeply before turning to face Jiraiya. You might want to settle in for this. This is going to be difficult to comprehend and digest. Jiraiya nodded and leaned back against a tree, listening to Conan recount everything that had happened, from Madara's resurrected body to how he created Akatsuki and their plans. In other words, he wants to unleash a supreme being on Rayne in order to prevent her from interfering with his plan to take over the world. Jiraiya spoke in an agitated tone. Conan nodded at Jiraiya's assessment as she looked up at the sky before returning her gaze to Jiraiya and giving him a hateful glare. Yes. Tell me why you didn't tell me that my son has been living with her the entire time. Jiraiya sighed deeply, knowing she wouldn't like what he had to say and bracing himself for the worst beating of his life. Yes, I'd known where he was for a while. Conan's eyes narrowed as she heard this and she leapt from the tree, grabbing Jiraiya by the vest and slamming him against the tree. She snarled at him and glared at him with venom. And you didn't explain why. Jiraiya winced at the venom in her voice and the fact that she had him pinned against a tree, with a branch going up his ass. I didn't tell you because he was safe and he was training to stop Akatsuki, and probably give Konoha a piece of his mind. Or Blade. And, before you say anything else, he is Rayne in person. Minato's ancestor was her sister. She, like you, had every right to take him away from Konoha. As he was pushed further up the tree branch, Jiraiya responded by wincing in pain. That's nonsense. After the sealing, they wouldn't let me near him. Sarutobi did everything in his power to give Naruto to me. But the council backstabbed him and forced him into a corner because the villagers agreed with them. He only kept Naruto alive by threatening to break the seal if he died before reaching the age of 15. Jiraiya winced at her words and fought back tears, knowing they were true. And the fact that the branch was firmly lodged up his ass. Do you know what it's like to see your own child being tortured as if he were an animal? Why did you think I'd left that god-awful place? After the council attempted to assassinate me, most of the Anbu would have come with me if I hadn't told them to stay behind and protect my child. Even after I told them to stay, a few of them tried to take Naruto and accompany me. Jiraiya flinched at her words in the branch, but he was relieved it could go much deeper. I'm aware of that, Akira. That's why Tsunade and I both left the village. Even Orochimaru left the village on orders from both Minato and Sarutobi-sensei to prevent something like this from happening. Or did you forget the council attempted and nearly succeeded in assassinating him if he and Minato hadn't come up with that immortality jutsu? We are aware that the village has deteriorated. However, there are a few who are worth protecting and saving because they have the will of the fire. And please don't try to blame us. We all tried to take him with us at some point. Orochimaru arrived a few days after Rayne to take Naruto away from the village. Needless to say, he was upset and nearly went on a killing spree, though I believe he was more afraid of your wrath. Conan had calmed down a little after hearing this, but he still had Jiraiya firmly pinned to the tree. Okay, I'll let that slide for the time being, sensei. But why not tell me he was with her from the start? Jiraiya's eyes were filled with nothing but pain as he bit his lower lip. Part of the reason was that he wasn't sure how she'd react to this, and he knew he'd be in for more pain. Because Naruto no longer possesses Kyuubi. Conan's eyes widen in surprise as she slams him against the tree and the rest of the branch up the pervert's ass. Jiraiya winced even more, but he spoke calmly to her, which was impressive given the pain he had to be in. And because he is the world's first dual half-breed. He is a dhampir as well as a Hanyu. Her eyes widened in surprise as she let go of him and fell to her knees. When Jiraiya realized he wasn't pinned anymore, he quickly destroyed the tree after freeing himself from the damn tree branch of agony. Jiraiya sighed deeply as he returned his gaze to her and saw Conan staring at the ground in despair. They didn't have a choice but to transform him in order to keep him alive, did they? Jiraiya nodded sadly to Conan, who clenched her fists before punching the ground, leaving a decent-sized crater but nothing like Tsunade could have done. After a few moments, Conan returned his gaze to Jiraiya, threatening him with pain and possibly castration if he didn't comply. Bring me to him. Jiraiya sighed slightly, shook his head, and looked at her sadly before leaping out of Conan's reach. There is no Akira. Conan's eyes narrowed and burned with cold fury as she stared Jiraiya down and tried to grab him so she could torture him in 1,000 ways until he agreed. After all, why not? The Gamma Sennin sighed sadly and looked pityingly at her. He really wanted to take her to him, but with the way things were right now, he couldn't for both of their sakes. Because, if what you say is true, he is still not strong enough to take on Akatsuki on his own. From the inside, he will still require your and Deidara's assistance. I promise you that once we stop them, I will take you to your son. Conan glared at him angrily before sighed deeply, looked down at the ground, and nodded in agreement. I'll tell Deidara when he gets back from his botched mission in Sunna. Jiraiya nodded and smiled slightly at her, returning to his perverted self. It won't be a failure if I don't make it to Rayne and Itachi on time. He quickly consumed several seals and bit his thumb before slamming it to the ground to summon a large toad in armor. He jumped on top of it before returning his attention to Conan. Conan, do everything you can to disrupt them from within without being discovered. Jiraiya raced away on his large toad, and Conan nodded. I'll give it my all, Jiraiya-sensei. As she gazed up at the sky, she sighed deeply. Minato Koishi, please forgive me for missing Naruto. Conan closed her eyes and extended her hand, revealing an origami bird that began to grow into a much larger bird, similar to the one Deidara flew on before jumping on its back and flying towards the Akatsuki base. Naruto hummed lightly as he cooked the steaks about 20 minutes later. With his enhanced hearing and smell, he noticed Rayne had entered the kitchen. He looked up at his mother figure and sighed lightly at her pale form and the slight crazed look in her eyes, indicating that she would drain the blood of a turned in seconds. He wondered absently what that would be like, given how large and hard-skinned they were. Rayne turned to face Naruto, noticed he was cooking, and smiled at him. I'm going hunting. I'll return in 10 minutes. And if not, I'm probably having a good time. Naruto blinked a few times before shuddering as he remembered the last time she went out and had fun. The entire clearing in the forest she had been in, about a square kilometer in size, was covered in blood, with a psychotic Rayne smiling in the middle of it. He shook his head at her, putting it in the mentally disturbing category. Maybe you shouldn't go so long without eating, Ka-san. I mean, I understand we don't have to feed that frequently, but it's still not healthy to starve yourself. And then do what you did last time. Rayne leaned against the window and shook her head at him. Yes, yes. I'll try, but I can't promise anything. I enjoy going on rampages. Please stop addressing me as Ka-san. It makes me feel older. Naruto shuddered once more as he moved away from Rayne. Rayne shook her head at him and jumped out the window, heading deep into the forest. Naruto sighed and returned his attention to the stakes, feeling sorry for any living creature, human, animal, vampire, or demon, that got in her way. Because they would not be able to survive. He sighed again as he examined the steaks and removed his 2 rare steaks from the pan while continuing to cook the rest. Rayne was draining the blood of a very unfortunate low-level vampire a few minutes later in a very eerie-looking clearing. She bit down harder as she drank the blood seeping from its neck, her eyes glowed unnaturally. As she finished draining the vamp, she heard a loud crash behind her and quickly turned around to snarl at it, only to sigh in frustration when she saw how it was. What are you looking for, pervert? You never come unless it's absolutely necessary. Jiraiya nodded and jumped off Gamma, dusting himself off before staring Rayne dead in the eyes. Yes, it is. This is crucial. The truth about Akatsuki. Rayne's eyes narrowed slightly as she waited for Jiraiya to continue. Jiraiya sighed and shook his head before asking her a question he knew would bring up painful memories for her. Do you know anything about Uchiha Madara? Rayne's eyes widened as she heard his name, and memories of the 2 of them came flooding back to her. She answered quietly, closing her eyes so she wouldn't have to see them. He was my lover until he began sleeping around in order to raise his clan to greater heights and take over the world. I couldn't let him get away with it, so I killed him. Jiraiya nodded slightly and noticed Rayne's tone, and he knew this would be difficult for her to accept. He's still breathing. Rayne's head snapped up and she glared at Jiraiya demonically. That is not a possibility. I dismembered him into hundreds of pieces before burning his body to ensure there was nothing left. He sighed deeply and looked pityingly at Rayne. You only destroyed his body, not his soul, so he was able to survive until he was able to resurrect himself. I know it's true because my inside source discovered he's the true leader of Akatsuki. Her eyes narrowed and she glared at Jiraiya with an eerie glint in her eyes, but she didn't say anything as Jiraiya continued on. Did you ever mention Beliar to him? Rayne nodded as he continued to stare at the super pervert, but this time with a confused glint in her eyes because she had no idea where this was going. Yes, I told him about my fight with him and how lucky I was that he wasn't at full strength. If he was at full power, I doubt I or anyone else could win. Even with my current strength, I doubt I could stand up to a third of his full strength. Jiraiya nodded before sighing deeply, as if he already knew. Is it possible to resurrect him? She nodded at him after a brief moment of thought. If anyone managed to get all Biju. Rayne's eyes widen as she realizes what has happened. His expression hardened as she realized what was going on. He desires that the Biju resurrect Beliar. That knucklehead. Beliar is uncontrollable. Jiraiya nodded wisely, realizing that a being like Beliar being controlled was ridiculous. I had a feeling. She rubbed her temples and sighed deeply. After being revived, he will seek out the scattered pieces of his body in order to regain his full power. I have his left eye. It's recently been activating on its own, so I'm guessing what they're doing is causing it. Almost certainly. They are currently on their way to Sunna and Kiri to pick up Ichibi and Yanbi. Rayne nodded, and she was about to run towards the mansion when Jiraiya stopped her. She obviously wants to see him, Rayne froze in her tracks, her gaze fixed on the ground. Yes. I've known she wanted to since you told me she was alive and in a bad situation. I've also been attempting to persuade Naruto to stop addressing me as Ka-san. Kyuubi and Itachi have been looking at me strangely since I told him to do that, as if I know something and am keeping them in the dark. Jiraiya nodded and shook his head, as if it made sense. Okay, I'm out of here. I must provide false information to the council. When they assassinated Sensei, everything went to hell. They haven't even elected a new Hokage because they enjoy having total control over everything. They even declared Naruto an S-class Nukenin, but aside from the new ones, none of the Hunter Nins crossed Naruto's name off the list, refusing to pursue him for any reason other than protection, having taken Akira's words to heart. If things continue as they are, there will be a civil war between the council and the Anbu. Rayne nodded, having seen similar things on her trips to investigate what was going on in the hidden villages. I know. Jiraiya nodded slightly before jumping back on Gamma and rushing out of the forest, not wanting to stay there any longer as Rayne used her stop-time ability and sped towards the mansion. Everyone had sat down and begun eating at the dinner table. Kyuubi and Yugito were both devouring their steaks at breakneck speed. Nibi glared at Itachi as he munched on his Pocky, wanting to grab the stick and shove it down his throat. They all jumped up as Rayne burst into the room with a solemn expression on her face. They all came to a halt and stared at her hardened face as she began issuing orders. You and Nibi, Naruto, are going to Sunna to retrieve the Ichibi container. Kyuubi jumped up and his eyes narrowed. That's not a good idea, you know. For one thing, Shukaku will not listen to me, his vessel is as powerful as Naruto if he transforms, and Akatsuki will not pursue him for 5 years. Rayne gave him a hard stare before saying something that made both his and Nibi's hearts stop for a moment. You've heard of Beliar. As Nibi hissed loudly at the name, Kyuubi's eyes widened and close. Naruto had no idea what was going on, but he had heard of Beliar from Rayne's stories. Rayne spoke slowly, looking at all three of them. According to Jiraiya, resurrecting him is Akatsuki's secondary goal, in addition to world dominance. For the time being, we must collect the other Biju before they do. That's why Itachi will go get Yanbi's vessel, while I will go get Gobi. You will stay here and teach Yugito how to use some of her demonic abilities. Yugito looked around, perplexed, as she had no idea what was going on, but spoke softly. Why is Kyuubi teaching me? Isn't it preferable if Nibi did it? Even though she was still wary of the Nekomata Biju, she couldn't fathom why Kyuubi would be the one to train her. Rayne looked at her and shook her head. In some of your abilities, Kyuubi can train you just as well, if not better. While Nibi is away, he can and will teach you how to control your fire affinity, as do the Nekomatas and Kitsunes. The reason I chose you to accompany Naruto is that I want to see if we can trust you. I know Naruto won't be able to beat the Ichibi container if he lets it go, so that's where you come in. Nibi paused for a moment before nodding, as if she understood Rayne's reasoning. I mean, why would she trust someone she'd only known for a day? Yugito nodded slightly in agreement with Rayne's response, which made sense. She sniffed the air as everyone was getting ready and noticed a difference between Naruto's scent and Kyuubi's. Wait, why doesn't Naruto smell like a fox since he used to be Kyuubi's vessel? As she looked at the said person, Nibi scoffed. That's because he isn't. His demon blood, which should have been Kitsune, somehow combined with the vampiric properties during his transformation into his dual half-breed status. As a result, Naruto is an Inu rather than a Kitsune. Don't ask any of us how because we have no idea because it has never happened before. Naruto nodded, knowing this already and having to train with Gobi for an entire year. He shivered at the memories before turning to Rayne and shaking his head. I guess you want us to get out of here as soon as possible. Rayne sighed as he rushed upstairs to get his equipment after nodding to Naruto's statement. After a few moments, he arrived at the front door to find that everyone except Nibi had left. "Mutt, hurry up. It's bad enough that I was paired with you." Naruto growled angrily at her, making her appear even more delighted. Now. Let's get started. I need this done as soon as possible." He nodded and muttered under his breath, growling a little at her. Nibi glared at him angrily, as if she had heard everything perfectly. Rayne locked her gaze on the man for a moment before driving one of her blades into his skull and bringing it up, slicing his head in two. She stared at his body for a few more seconds before tossing it into the lava pit and watching it burn. To their surprise, the body transformed into someone else before being completely engulfed by the lava. Rayne returned to Gobi with a slightly agitated tone, unaware that one of them possessed the ability to create sacrifice clones. "It's no longer safe here. He'll tell the others where you are, and they'll come to get you. The safest thing for you to do is come with me." Gobi growled a little at the prospect, but the prospect of seeing Naruto again quickly overcame her pride. "Fine, but don't expect me to hold back if those cats start anything." Rayne seemed perplexed as to how she knew Nibi and Yugito were staying with them. "You have the odor of two Nekomatas." Rayne sniffed lightly before shrugging indifference as they grumbled their way through the volcanic tunnel. Itachi was rushing through the treetops as quickly as he could, though he wasn't really paying attention to anything except munching on his Pocky. If anyone else had passed by, they would have been hard-pressed not to stare as he avoided running into each tree like Kakashi did when reading his Icha Icha Paradise. He quickly noticed that a cabin in the middle of the forest was flooded, most likely because someone from Akatsuki had already arrived. Itachi shifted into battle mode after finishing his Pocky, activating his Sharingan and scanning the area for the nearest chakra and Yuki signatures. He rushed towards the area once he found the only two in the area, only to see an old man around 70 or 80 make an ice sword out of water to parry the odd-looking sword of the fish, shark-like man. Itachi would have openly gawked at the sight, but he had seen stranger things, so he was used to it. Kisame deflected the ice sword before kicking the old man in the gut, sending him skidding. Even though he was surprised by the old man's skill for his age, the fish shark-like man smirked as he went through a rapid amount of hand seals to end the battle once and for all. Sweden. Suiryuden no Jutsu. Two cries could be heard as two water dragons formed and fought for dominance before negating each other. Kisame's eyes widened as he realized it wasn't the old man who had done this and quickly spun around to see a young man who resembled his partner, Fugoku. The fish shark-like man blinked at him a few times before grinning madly as he realized who he was looking at. "Ah, so you must be the Uchiha traitor my partner keeps threatening to kill." Itachi's eyes narrowed as he heard this and he glared at Kisame with a deadly tone. "And who would be your partner?" Kisame flashed a toothy grin, making him look more like a shark than a fish. "Uchiha Fugoku, if I heard him correctly, your father." Itachi's Sharingan spans wildly at the mention of his father's name, but he miraculously remains calm and collected. "It depends on your perspective, but I'm surprised he joined your group because he was hell-bent on killing Naruto." Kisame laughed as he heard this, causing Itachi's eyes to narrow even more. "He is still there, and he accepted our offer because extraction always kills the vessel." Kisame's eyes narrowed as a smirk appeared on the teenage Uchiha's lips. "I see. I guess it's a shame there's nothing else to extract." "And what does that mean?" Kisame asked, his gaze fixed on the Uchiha in front of him. Itachi responded by reaching into his pouch. Kisame immediately took a defensive stance and grabbed Samahata, only to have him pull away. "I took two Pocky sticks and tossed one to the old man, who looked at him puzzled." Kisame's face faltered and his sweat dropped as Itachi began to munch on his cherry-flavored stick. It means exactly what I said, there is nothing more to be extracted. Kisame pushed himself off the ground as he heard this and was at a loss for words. His mind was racing at 100 miles per hour as he tried to figure out what the young Uchiha meant. What on earth does he mean? Is it possible for the boy to have absorbed Kyuubi? Or did Kyuubi somehow manage to free himself from the boy and survive it? And what is he doing eating Pocky in front of me? That will be paid for by the cretin. During his deliberations on what Itachi's words meant, Kisame realized that Itachi was paying attention to the Pocky and the old man rather than him. Of course, this enraged him even more, and he screamed as he lifted Samahata onto his shoulder and charged Itachi. Emo-looking fago, die. Itachi came to a halt while checking on the old man when he heard this. He couldn't have just said that to him. He was definitely going to die. He didn't mind being called emo because he resembled the look, but he was a fago. Killing intent and bloodlust rolled off Itachi as he stood up and activated his Mangekyu unconsciously before turning to face Kisame. I was going to let you live in order for you to provide that information to your leaders. But now I'm going to kill you 1,000 times for that insult. Kisame made the mistake of looking into Itachi's eyes as he charged him, and he noticed something he didn't like. Mangekyu. Oh my god. He found himself strapped to a cross in a world of red, black, and gray with a black moon in the sky. When he looked down, Itachi was gleaming evilly at him. As Itachi spoke maliciously, he gulped, knowing this wasn't going to end well. Let's get this party started, shall we? For the next 24 hours, you will watch me eat your relatives while you are forced to eat it yourself. Itachi immediately pulled out some sushi as a clone of himself appeared with another box and began walking towards Kisame. Kisame could only scream once before having sushi shoved down his throat while Itachi gleefully ate his and watched the horror on Kisame's face. Yugito was panting heavily as she rose from the ground and looked up at the red-haired bastard, as she was dubbed, to see him smile at her. Let's give it another shot. She panted a little more as she lifted herself off the ground. Kyuubi smirked at her before vanishing from view. Yugito held back her screams as she searched for him but couldn't find him before being punched in the gut. She attempted a punch on instinct but stumbled forward because there was no one there. She felt her feet leave the ground abruptly as she was tripped and fell face first into the ground. You're too slow, Yugito said, pulling herself off the ground and yelling at him with her now massive lungs. I'm not slow. You're simply moving too quickly. Kyuubi's sweat evaporated and he began to laugh nervously. Oh, I forgot I wasn't training Naruto, sorry. Yugito screamed in rage as she lunged at him at terrifying speeds, gripped his neck, and began strangling him. Please remind me. It's not a good idea to piss off Nekomatas. Unless it's Nibi, in which case it's a lot of fun. Can't. Think. No. Oxygen. He would have continued, but he couldn't because there was no oxygen getting to his brain. Naruto and Nibi had finally arrived in Sunna as the sun was setting, only to see and hear loud explosions ripping through the town. Naruto let out a light growl. Shit, they started, he would have said as he ran towards the destruction when Nibi grabbed his shoulders and pulled him back. He returned his gaze and growled at her. Let go. Nibi responded with a calm shake of her head. Let them knock out the Ichibi vessel, and then we can kill them when they're worn out and drag the vessel with us. Plus, I don't want our presence to be discovered just yet. Naruto considered it for a moment and knew it made sense, but he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye. That would work if it weren't for the oncoming wave of iron sand. Nibi quickly turned around and saw the metallic sand approaching them before leaping over as Naruto vanished from view. As Naruto phased next to her, Nibi backflipped in the air and landed gracefully on the ground. As the cape fluttered around a large scorpion-like puppet, both of their gazes were drawn to it. So the Kyuubi Jinchuriki appeared here after all. I guess the spy must have contacted you in some way. It doesn't matter. I'll capture you right now. Naruto remained motionless as he stared at the puppet master until a loud cry rang out throughout Sunna. I'm free. I'm going to kill you all. Both Naruto and Nibi sweated as they heard the tanuki gleefully laugh as small explosions hit his body, doing nothing but rebuilding itself. Naruto had to stop sweating as the tanuki began toppling buildings, oblivious to the fact that Deidara was attempting to attack it. Wow, that's one insane demon. As Sasori refrained from sweating and dropping oil on the scene, Nibi nodded in agreement. Nibi sighed, shaking her head in annoyance. Okay, I'll take out the stupid fuck Shukaku while you handle Puppet Man over here. Naruto nodded, not wanting to take on the Psycho Tanuki as Nibi quickly transformed into her demonic form before bouncing towards Shukaku, grinning gleefully at him. Remember me, Shukaku-kun. When the giant sand Tanuki turned around, he noticed Nibi smiling evilly at him. He would have gulped if he were in his real body, knowing that look did not bode well for him or any other male. It usually meant I was in a good mood, so I was either getting laid or castrating someone. And, sadly, it was almost always the second of the two. Nibi grinned even more maliciously and gleefully as she leapt towards Shukaku, who retaliated by firing a wind bullet at the insane cat. Nibi easily avoided it by wrapping her tail around a building and spinning herself on it before leaping towards Shukaku. Unfortunately, the building couldn't withstand the pressure and collapsed to the sand below as Nibi's tail left it. She tackled Shukaku with the force of a freight train, pinned him to the ground, and began scratching his head, hoping to wake up Gaara. Deidara, who was watching the battle of the psychotic Biju, sweated and began to back away with his bird, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire because he knew he wouldn't survive if he was. He turned to tell his partner, Sasori, to get the hell out of here when he realized he was talking to a blonde-haired boy with red streaks who matched the description of the Kyuubi. Oh no, this can't get any worse, can it? Rankuden, futon. Shukaku let out a massive burst of air, which Nibi easily avoided from point-blank range. Of course, her evasion put Deidara directly in the path of the blast. As he saw this, Deidara couldn't help but curse mentally. Damn it, me and my big mouth. As the wind bullet struck, he jumped off his clay bird. Of course, his bird wasn't meant to take that kind of punishment, so it exploded, launching Deidara to the ground. When he collided, he heard a few snaps and cracks and was fairly certain it was his spine, as well as other bones he couldn't name at the time. Of course, with his current luck, he just happened to land in front of a girl with blonde hair pulled back in 4 pigtails and a massive fan strapped to her back. You attacked my little brother, Deidara lamented as she pulled out her fan. You have to pay for it now. Yeah, goddammit. Nibi quickly backed away from Shukaku and inhaled deeply as a large grin crossed her transformed face before spouting black flames from her mouth. Shukaku wasn't as mobile in this sand body as he would have been in his real body, so he couldn't avoid the flames and was engulfed by them. Within seconds, his entire lower body had turned to glass, rendering it useless. Nibi smirked as she looked up at the enraged Shukaku, who was trying to gather more sand to recreate his body, as she smashed the glass with one of her tails and forced Gaara out of the Tanuki's head, waking him up as glass cut through his flesh. Shukaku, of course, was enraged and had to scream one more time. No, I just left. Damn you, bitch. Nibi shook her head and gawked at him. You psycho raccoon mutt, stop being such a baby. When she realized the vessel wouldn't survive the fall, she quickly transformed back into her human form and grabbed Gaara, slapping a seal on his head to knock him out and prevent Shukaku from resurfacing. She turned to the gate, shaking her head, but was stopped by a girl with a slightly dented and bloodied fan. "Please let go of my brother." Nibi blinked, staring at the girl. She simply demanded her. "Nekomata no Nibi." Nibi gritted her teeth and resisted the urge to beat the young girl. "Oh no, you didn't just command me. My name is Nibi no Nekomata, and I'm a weasel bitch, so respect your elders." Temari's eyes widen with fear and she shakes. This woman identified as a Biju, and she was aware of her summons. Temari stood firm and was about to grab her fan when she was knocked down from behind by a clay baseball bat. And, of course, the bat exploded, slightly singing her for vengeance. "Annoying girl, she beat the hell out of me with that fan, I say." Nibi's eyes narrowed as she noticed the blonde-haired, girly-looking man in front of her and was about to pounce when he began waving her off, fearing for his own safety. Wait, yeah. Conan and I are your Akatsuki spies." She blinked as she heard this and went over what Rayne had told her before leaving with the mutt. She was aware that the woman named Conan was one of their 2 spies in Akatsuki, and the fact that this guy was aware of this must imply that he was the other. "Okay, I'll believe you. Now get out of my way, because I have a bad feeling something bad is about to happen." Deidara nodded and waved Nibi on his way to find Sasori before his eyes widened and he cursed aloud. "Oh shit, he's going that way, yeah. Damn it." He quickly turned around and ran towards them, hoping that the vibes he was getting were correct. Of course, his luck hadn't been very good today, so he was fairly certain it was. Kisame whimpered pitifully at the demon in front of him, which was currently chopping fish heads and forcing him to eat them. Itachi shrugged after a few more minutes, looking at his imaginary watch. "You're lucky. Your time is up. I was going to have you wrapped by sharks for the next 24 hours. Kisame collapsed and passed out from the terrifying power of Tsukiyomi as the world slowly returned to normal. Itachi turned around, knelt beside the old man, and helped him up, shaking his head. The old man scrutinized him, not believing him for a second. "Why did you assist me?" Itachi shrugged, taking out another pocky stick and munching on it, making the old man sweat and wonder where he kept them all. "It was simple. My goal was to come here, stop him, and transport you to a safer location." As he heard this, the old man's eyes narrowed. He was never going to leave this place. He was too taken with it. "So you want to take me away from here as well, but I'm not going. This is my home." Itachi sighed and shook his head at the old man. "So you'd rather stay here and get caught by him or his fellow allies, which could lead to your death as they extract Yanbi from you and use it for world dominance once they've successfully caught the others?" When he heard this, the elderly man's eyes widened before drooping. "That explains why he attacked me." Itachi nodded, closing his eyes and taking another bite out of his pocky. The old man considered the ground for a few moments before looking up at the teenage Uchiha. "Alright, I'll let you have Yanbi on the condition that you don't let them get her." Itachi nodded and was about to pick him up when his eyes lit up, not knowing what was going on. "Wait, what do you think of her? How about you?" The old man shook his head before pointing to the forest as a girl of about 19 years old with forest green hair and eyes, a sleek face, and pale skin. She wore a pure black kimono with green lining, but the 4 lizard-like tails sprouting from her tailbone were the most noticeable feature about her. Itachi blinked and blinked again before turning to face the old man, perplexed. "How did she escape?" The older man responded by laughing at Itachi's puzzled and slightly irritated expression. "That's simple. She turned me half-demon a long time ago. How else could I have lived for so long, especially as a shinobi? She decided to stay with me just in case I ever needed help, and to be honest, she doesn't like being alone. You know, for a demon, she's extremely shy. Yanbi blushed as she walked over to them, glancing at Itachi because she could smell and sense that he wasn't entirely human. Shaking her head, she knelt beside him and placed her hands on his chest, which glowed green, as if looking for wounds. Her eyes widened slightly as she gazed up at him, tears in her eyes. But US said UW would stay with me. The old man sighed slightly at her trembling form before lightly hugging her. Her shivering subsided slightly, but Itachi realized why when he noticed the elderly man pressing a pressure point in the back of her neck that had put her to sleep. He slowly stood up and struggled to hand her to the slightly surprised Itachi. Get out of her, kid, I don't have much time left. Itachi narrowed his eyes as he looked over him. There was nothing seriously wrong with him other than a few shaves from Samahata, bruises, and broken bones. Even at his age, he knew that wasn't enough to kill him, so he had to question this. You appear fine to me. In response, the elderly man shook his head before abruptly coughing loudly. He checked the old man with a diagnostic scan after quickly creating a cage bunshin and having it take Yanbi. Itachi's eyes widened as he noticed what was causing it and realized immediately that this was what Yanbi saw when she used a similar technique. The old man chuckled lightly before coughing again. You see, I accidentally opened the final Hachiman during the fight, don't you? Itachi grimaced as he realized there was nothing he could do about it. Even transforming him into a full-fledged demon couldn't save him. The old man coughed again and looked up at the somewhat glum Uchiha. I have one request of you, Itachi said as he looked down at the dying man. Can you tell her I loved her when she wakes up? I never had the courage to do it myself. Itachi closed his eyes and nodded in response to the old man's request. You have my word on it. The old man smiled a little as the life in his eyes began to fade and his body began to fall limp. Sighing slightly as his eyes became cold and lifeless, Itachi brushed his hand over his eyes, closing them before burying the man with a Doten jutsu he copied. Turning quickly to a tree, he quickly cut one down and, within a few minutes, he made a cross and dug it into the ground in front of his cave. Taking a deep breath, he removed a peacefully looking Yanbi from his cage bunshin and carried her in bridal style. He smiled slightly as he rushed off with her in his arms, not wanting to disappoint a man who reminded him of the deceased Sandaime Hokage. Sasori was shaken as the woman next to Naruto transformed into a 40-meter tall cat with two tails as the Sunna Jinchuriki freed Ichibi. This brief distraction cost him his favorite puppet, Sandaime Cage, as Naruto sliced it in half at breakneck speed. But he didn't stop there. He quickly turned around and approached him. Regaining his focus, Sasori quickly countered his rush by striking Naruto with his tail. Naruto easily sidestepped it with his superior speed and continued on his path towards Sasori. As he appeared in front of the stunned Sasori, his blade sprang into action, and he thrust his arm forward, piercing the puppet. Naruto's eyes widen as he expects blood to squirt out, but there is none. This nearly cost him his life when Sasori struck him with his tail, which he barely avoided by jumping back a few times. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the man in front of him, sniffing the air again and growling. You transformed your body into a puppet. Sasori's laughter at Naruto's remark caused the young blonde to narrow his eyes even more. Of course, that's why you can't win, boy. He quickly pulled Hikuro's tail string, and it swept back and hit Naruto in the chest while he was still in range, sending him skidding across the sand. I'm not on the same level as Kakuzu and Hidan boy, so it's time for me to finish this. As Sasori lifted his puppet arm, a large flame shot out towards a slightly surprised Naruto, narrowing Naruto's eyes even more. He quickly jumped over it, but his eyes widened in midair as he noticed a kunai approaching him due to his dilated perception. He couldn't completely avoid it even with it on, as it left a small cut on his hip. As soon as he touched down, Naruto turned toward Sasori, who appeared to be smiling, though he couldn't tell. But he was certain that he was laughing at him. "You've lost." That poison was designed specifically for Jinchuriki, as it interacts with the Yuki and uses it to paralyze your body, and it also contains an anesthetic that will keep you unconscious for more than a week. Naruto's eyes widened as he heard this, and he searched himself, discovering that his Yuki was being used against him. He gritted his teeth as he looked around for something to help him before noticing that the sun had set and there was no moon. He had an unusual grin on his lips and spoke in a darker tone than usual. "You know, your plan would have worked if today hadn't been my weakest day." Even though he didn't show it, Sasori's eyes narrowed in confusion. "And what exactly does that mean, brat?" Naruto smirked as the sun finally set and darkness descended. When Sasori didn't get an answer, he assumed the poison was working and was about to approach Naruto when he noticed his body changing. His skin began to change quickly, turning gray and acquiring a slimy texture. As his emerald eyes gradually shifted to gold, the red in his eyes turned pitch black. His claws retracted slightly, but they appeared even sharper than before. His fangs grew even larger and appeared to belong to a larger animal than him. As two bulges appeared beneath his shirt, the back of his shirt began to tear. A large rip was heard as two slimy bat-like wings about 5 feet long each shot expanded from his back. Naruto chuckled darkly at Sasori's terrified expression and bared his elongated fangs before speaking in a pure evil voice. "It means I'm no longer in King's mind." Rayne and Gobi breathed a sigh of relief as they emerged from the long tunnel and into the night sky. Damn. Time moves fast in there. Or it's the length of the tunnel. I mean, who builds a tunnel 40 miles long? And then you can't get out in your demonic form. Gobi continued walking forward, shrugging indifference. Prevents them from taking me when they were on their way. Rayne couldn't help but think it made sense, nodding her head in agreement. She took out her headset and turned it on after a few moments of walking, ignoring the static on the other end. "Itachi, Nibi, how are you doing?" After a few moments of walking, Rayne came to a halt and waited for someone to call back, causing Gobi to come to a halt as well, though she was much more irritated. After a few minutes, Itachi's voice could be heard on the other end. "I'm here, but you need better sources. I have Yanbi in my arms, who has apparently been free from her vessel for a long time, and I also planted the information that Naruto is no longer Kyuubi's vessel, as you requested, though he won't be able to speak for a while." Rayne, intrigued by the reason for the question, inquired. "Can you explain why?" "He insulted my sexual preference, so I used Tsukiyomi on him and fulfilled his worst nightmare." A sweat drop formed on her forehead as she tried and failed miserably to keep it in. She responded with a sigh and a shake of her head. "As long as you don't break his mind right now, you can do it later. We need to get Naruto off the list so they don't come after him." "Can't promise anything," Itachi said with his usual disdain. Rayne sighed, mumbling something about Uchihas and their disobedient ways. After a few more moments of waiting, which irritated Gobi even more, Nibi's voice could be heard on the other end of the line. "How the hell did I get this thing?" Rayne sighed in frustration and rubbed her irritated brow. "Because Naruto destroys everything he's ever been given in some way, so I just stopped giving them to him because I don't want to keep going out to buy more." Nibi panted a little as if she was recovering from something after a long pause, though both could swear they heard laughing from the other end. Probably from laughing her $1 off. "I just got the Ichibi container, and I'm on my way to get Naruto right now." Rayne nodded in agreement as she turned off her headset, unaware that something had piqued Nibi's interest. Rayne looked over at Gobi, who was staring at the night sky, shaking her head from the bad vibes she was picking up. She would have continued, but Gobi spoke up first. "Please tell me Naruto isn't out tonight, Rayne." Rayne looked at her, confused, until she looked up at the night sky and noticed there was no moon. Rayne's already pale skin loses color as her eyes widen in surprise. Oh my god. Gobi's eyes widened as she rushed towards Rayne at breakneck speed, lifting her up by her shirt. You let him out tonight of all nights, Rayne said, knowing that shit was about to hit the fan as Gobi's eyes turned red. You let him out knowing what he becomes tonight. It took all my power just to hold him back when he transformed during our year of training. If it was possible, Rayne appeared to be drained of all color as she heard this. We're on our way to Sunna. I just hope it's not too late. It's getting dark there. Gobi clenched her teeth but let go of Rayne, who took off towards Sunna, Gobi close behind. Nibi bolted from Sunna's gates, closely followed by Deidara. As soon as she arrived, she focused her attention on Naruto after noticing his transformation. Oh no, the mutt's demon blood has vanished. Deidara rushed over to her after hearing her comment and not being too far behind her. What does that imply? Nibi approached him and stared him down before returning her attention to Naruto. This means that instead of being a dual half-breed, he is a full-fledged vampire for tonight. Deidara blinked a few times, allowing the information to sink in before widening in shock, but quickly shook it off, intending to tell Conan about it. That is, if he survives tonight and his current luck does not point in that direction. I can do anything. Yeah. Don't get your blood sucked dry, Nibi joked, making Deidara look at her with a tick mark on his left temple. Before he could respond, Naruto spoke to Sasori in a voice that radiated pure evil. Let's see what you're capable of, puppet. As he was suddenly surrounded by thousands of puppets, Naruto watched with interest. As they all came after him at once, his eyes were filled with amusement. All of the puppets that had surrounded him were ripped to shreds in the blink of an eye. Sasori's eyes widened in fear as he saw what had happened and realized he had no chance without them. He turned around to run, not caring if Deidara was with him or not, because his life was more important. But as soon as he turned around, he saw Naruto staring at him with amusement in his lifeless gold pupils. I'm on my way somewhere. Even if his mechanical face couldn't show it, Sasori was shocked and surprised by this turn of events. Naruto's hand pierced through Hiriko's chest before ripping it open, revealing Sasori's heart. As Hiriko fell to the ground, Naruto looked at the heart and grinned with delight. He opened his mouth and sank his teeth into Sasori's blood, quickly draining it. He looked up as he finished to see Nibi, Deidara, and an unconscious Gaara. His eyes brighten slightly as an amused smile spreads across his face before he crushes the heart in his hand, which crumbles under his grasp. It appears that I have more toys to play with. Hearing this, both Nibi and Deidara moved into defense, knowing that this was no longer Naruto. Naruto was walking through his mind's sewer. But there was something off about it. This is strange. Normally, my mind is just a dark maze. Why would it turn into a sewer? He pushed that thought aside for the time being and continued exploring the sewer. It was strange, it was exactly like the maze he was used to, only filled with water he preferred not to step in. Ignoring the water, he looked around and decided to go to Kyuubi's old cage because he was going nowhere else. He noticed something was wrong as soon as he arrived. The first thing she noticed was that, unlike the rest of the sewer, there was no water here. Second, it appeared that an invisible barrier was preventing water from entering the room. Third, he was certain there was no mirror in his mind. Finally, since when was he completely devoid of any color other than black and white, and his eyes had a black background with crimson pupils? Ah, you finally made it, King. Welcome to my domain. Naruto blinked, perplexed, at the reflection of himself in front of him. Okay, who are you and why are you in my head? The other Naruto smirked at him evilly. I am you. I am your dark side. I am your bottled up emotions. I am your envy, gluttony, wrath, pride, lust, greed, and sloth.
Naruto's face was filled with surprise as he stared at what appeared to be himself.
But how? My life has been great since Ka-san, Itachi, and Kyuubi took me in. Dark Naruto grinned manically at Naruto, expecting this reaction. True, but you still remember your life in Konoha, and you despise the place with an unholy passion, even if you don't realize it. It was their treatment of you, and your refusal to strike back at them, that started my creation. When the women and fox changed your DNA, they unwittingly caused me to manifest into the form I'm in now, but even then I couldn't come out, until I discovered the Hanyu's weakness. And he wasn't done yet, as he grinned wide when he saw Naruto's shocked expression before continuing. So, when the night of the new moon arrived, I took my chance and tried to take control of your boy. I succeeded, but I didn't. I was stopped by that infernal dhampir and the damned kitsune when I came out. Naruto growled at the dark version of himself, narrowing his eyes and shifting his stance to prepare to defend himself, while dark Naruto's grin grew wilder. But there is a problem with that as well. If I eliminated you, I would also cease to exist, negating the point of doing so I devised a better method. Naruto's eyes narrowed even more as he heard this, but he continued to listen. I need to defeat you and then lock you up so you are no longer a problem for me. I could have done this easily without informing you, but I am you, and I have your pride. I could not dignify myself by ambushing an opponent when I can get the pleasure of fighting them head-on. Dark Naruto mirrored Naruto's stance before he smiled wickedly. Now, King, let us see who comes out on top. Yugito, pay attention. Yugito sighed, completely bored out of her mind, but obeyed Kyuubi as she returned her gaze to him. He continued his lesson, nodding as he noticed she was paying attention. As I previously stated, each Hanyu has a different time of weakness they must go through, which means they turn human for a brief period of time and are vulnerable. Each type of demon has different times of weakness for the Hanyus. For example, Kitsunes have the half moon, Nekomatas have the second quarter, and Inas have theirs during the new moon. Yugito sighed angrily as she looked at him. Of course, it's so simple that an academy student could understand the majority of it. As she looked out the dojo window, Kyuubi grumbled angrily at the girl's attitude. She returned her attention to Kyuubi and had to ask a question. Wait, Naruto's is during the new moon? While his mind was saying something completely different, he nodded in agreement to her statement. I wouldn't call it a weakness, but she has a point. Yes, very good. Yugito nodded, assuming it was true, and returned her gaze to the outside world. Does that mean Naruto is going to them tonight? When Kyuubi heard that, the blood in his body froze. He looked outside and had only one intelligent thing to say. Oh my god. Nibi hissed at Naruto's words as she set Gaara down, knowing that he would only distract her from the power Naruto was releasing. She leaned in close to Deidara and whispered to him. Use your explosives to knock him out, clay user. As Naruto approached them with a malignant gleam in his eye, Deidara nodded and reached into his pouches. Nibi hissed even louder as she stepped in front of him as he approached Deidara. Naruto's gaze was drawn to the demon cat, and his grin widened. If you want to go first, that's fine. Naruto rushed her at speeds far exceeding those of his regular form. It wasn't fast enough, though, as Nibi easily kept up with it and caught his wrist as she tried to reach her heart. You'll need a lot more than that to hurt me. Nibi tightened her grip on his wrist before pulling him forward and slamming her elbow into Naruto's throat before spinning kicking him in the gut, sending him stumbling back. Naruto glared at the Neko before insanely grinning at her as soon as he recovered from his quick strike. It appears so. Because he was too focused on Nibi, A clay bird flew up to him unnoticed and smashed into his chest before exploding, kicking up sand and smoke and making it unclear if it worked. Deidara scanned the smoke and sand with the device covering his left eye and saw no movement, so he relaxed, assuming it had knocked him out. Watch out. That was all Deidara could hear before something shot out of the smoke and raced towards him at breakneck speed. In response, he let a few more clay birds fly, which Naruto easily avoided before they exploded. Naruto arrived in an instant, missing his slash with his arm but not his wing pierce as it aimed for Deidara's heart. Deidara managed to move just enough at the last possible second to avoid being hit in the shoulder. Deidara hissed in pain, grasping the wing with both hands and attempting to pull himself off of it. When the other wing went through his arm like butter and pierced his right lung, he gritted his teeth and slowly pried it off. Deidara, unable to bear the pain, yelled at it as a portion of his right arm was severed and he fell to the ground. As soon as it hit the ground, Nibi appeared beside him and grabbed Naruto's wings, forcing them out and spinning him around like a discus player before throwing him towards the large wall that surrounded Sunna. Naruto flew through the air towards Sunna's barrier wall and collided with it, leaving a large crater in his wake. Nibi breathed deeply before exhaling a large amount of black fire that resembled Amaterasu, not wanting to give him a chance to get back up. Before consuming the crater, the flames rushed over to it. Deidara's eyes widen as he examines Nibi, stunned by what she did. As she approached him, she shook her head. That bomb was too weak to even scratch him. What I did should have sufficed, if not left some permanent damage. Deidara's jaw dropped to the ground in response to her statement. He couldn't have made it any stronger because it was C3, which he was certain would have killed him. But after seeing what she did to Naruto, he was perplexed because he thought it was excessive. That is, until the crater began to glow an eerie purple that appeared to be raw energy. Nibi stood firm as she turned around, her eyes narrowed at what was happening. How can he be conscious? That would have killed any vampire less than a B bordering on A. Something is wrong here. Naruto was already a B class without being full-blooded, and unlike demons, dhampirs do not benefit significantly from becoming full-fledged vampires. The purple energy in the crater exploded like a hurricane as the powerful winds blew everyone nearby away, even if they were using chakra to stay on the ground. Nibi was the only one who could hold her ground because she had previously faced much stronger gales of wind, but she still had to close her eyes due to the sand being blown into them. Nibi rubbed her eyes furiously as the wind died down, trying to get the sand crystals out of her eyes. When she succeeded, she turned towards the crater and saw Naruto climbing out with a dark purple glow surrounding him, feeling even stronger than before. Shit. What the hell happened to this power? With the amount of energy he's putting out, he's easily an S rank. Naruto's energy was steadily increasing and tearing through the ground as he moved towards an increasingly nervous Nibi. Damn it. What kind of power does he wield? To keep up with this, I need to transform. Nibi shifted her stance to all fours as her demonic features began to emerge. Her size increased as her Yuki flared around her in a show of power, hoping to make the vampiric Naruto back down. Instead, it had the opposite effect, increasing Naruto's grin and making him more vicious. I'm going to play now. As she began her transformation, she hissed angrily at him. Deidara stood on the sidelines, next to the unconscious Gaara, stunned by what was going on. He started cursing his luck because he knew something that everyone else was slowly figuring out. This isn't going to end well. Yeah, Deidara muttered to himself, oblivious to the blonde-hair girl sneaking up behind him, trying to find her brother. And don't even think about it, girl and puppet boy. If we remove that seal, we'll be in twice as much trouble as we are now. Yeah, Deidara said, not looking back at her or her other brother as he sealed his severed arm into a scroll before using his remaining hand to make some C3 explosives. Temari and Konkuro's eyes widened in surprise as he reached into his pouch, and they tensed up as they prepared for battle. Deidara shook his head, looking at them both with the ocular device on his eye. He sighed and pointed to the battleground. Besides, I don't think you want to aggravate our situation. They both did so cautiously, not completely trusting Deidara. Why would they put their trust in an S-rank Nukanen? It didn't make a lot of sense to do so. Once they were close to him, they both noticed the large two-tailed cat that had previously easily beaten Shukaku in a terrifying-looking creature radiating terrible power. "What the hell is that thing?" exclaimed Konkuro, as Temari's eyes widened in recognition of something she read as a child. "Is that a vampire?" Temari asked shakily, not trusting her own voice at the time because she was terrified by the killing intent emanating from both the demon and the vampire. Deidara nodded at her words, continuing to focus on completing his C3. "From what I understand, yes." Konkuro looked at the two as if they were insane. And his mental statement was only partially correct. There are no vampires. That thing must be a demon. As he finished, someone else made their presence known by speaking up, frightening all three of them as they turned around in the direction of the voice. "No, that's a vampire. They're real people like you and me, and the majority of them are confined to one area due to the vampire overlord, who happens to be a dhampir, or a half-breed." Sabaku Bufu, the Yondaime Kazekage, surprised everyone. He cast a glance at Deidara before turning to face Gaara. "If I had to guess, you'd be from Akatsuki but one of the spies in it, and if I'm not mistaken, those two were supposed to be taking Gaara out of here." Deidara nodded, reasoning that Conan had passed the information on to Jiraiya, who then passed it on to Rayne's group and the Kazekage. Temari and Konkuro were both taken aback by their father's words. Konkuro was the first to speak up after letting the information sink in. "Wait a minute, you knew this was coming." Bufu shook his head at the impending battle. "Of course, not this, but I knew they were coming for Gaara." Temari's eyes narrowed as she glared at her father, anger written across her face. "So you were just going to get rid of Gaara once and for all?" He winced at her tone, but knew he deserved it for his treatment of Gaara, and Temari was the only person the redhead actually cared about. Temari's eyes narrowed even more as she whipped out her fan and was about to charge her father when he spoke again, hoping to avoid the same beating she gave Deidara. "That doesn't mean that everything I've tried to do in the last year has been in vain. I've come to realize that it wasn't his fault that your mother died giving birth to him, but mine." Bufu sighed sadly before continuing his story, which surprised both of his children. "It was I that gave the order to have the priest seal Shukaku into Gaara as he was still in Shizuke's womb. If I knew the procedure would have killed her in the process, I would have never done it. After Gaara was born, I used him as an outlet for my anger of her death. I failed him as a father, and I want him to have a better life. So when I heard they were trying to get him before Akatsuki, I was all for it. This is my way of atoning for his death. I know he'll never be seen as a human here," Bufu said, turning away from his children and looking at Deidara with a deadly calm face. "If I knew, I would tell you, yeah," Deidara said with the same tone of voice. "I arrived here following the transformation. The only thing I know is that he gets stronger over time. I'm trying to concentrate now, if you would shut up." The two siblings were taken aback by the outburst, but the Kazekage noticed his hand in his pouch and saw the clay in it. "So he's from the Kurbomu clan from Iwagakure, which I thought was wiped out in the Iwa Kono War by the Uchihas and the Yondaime Hokage." As this was happening, Nibi charged at the vampiric Naruto and slashed down on the small vampire, but Naruto quickly flew out of the way and headed towards Nibi's head, which Nibi saw with agility beyond what her size should have been capable of, and jumped back to avoid the clawed hand as it attempted to pierce her skull. She took a deep breath and began to inflate a little before releasing a stream of black flames out of her mouth towards the vampire. Naruto tried to fly out of the way, but he wasn't fast enough as the flames engulfed him. He screamed in pain as the fire burned every inch of his skin while his rage increased.
His blood began to bubble more furiously than ever before as all his excess blood began to push outside of him. Nibby waited patiently to see if it was enough to stop him when the black flames began to spiral around in a sphere, surprising everyone who saw it.
The fire began to die out as if it was being put out, and what was left made everyone queasy. Naruto was flying with a few burns covering his body and wings, but what made it somewhat sickening to look at was that he was in the center of a miniature maelstrom of blood swirling viciously around him. As soon as they saw it, the blood stopped spiraling around him and dropped to the ground, splattering the sand with it. Nibby closed her eyes and shivered at Naruto's tone and look, which reminded her so much of Yamada no Orochi's grin that it was frightening. She reopened her eyes to find Naruto in her face before kicking her in the throat, forcing it shut. She tried to gasp in pain, but no air would come in or out. He quickly landed on her shoulder blades and rammed the tips of his wings into them, biting her lip in pain as she used her tails to swat him away, but he managed to dodge them by dislocating his wings from her shoulder blades. Dodging the two tails, Naruto grabbed one and used his super speed to fly as fast as he could away from the Nekomata. The cat Biju bit her lip harshly as her tail was yanked as if Tsunade had pulled it. Seeing her pain, Naruto rushed back to her tailbone and rammed his right claw into it, only to be swatted into the ground by both tails. Naruto pushed the tails off of him to see that Nibby had managed to reopen her throat and exhaled a large amount of flames towards him. Nibby scanned the area for him, knowing the flames didn't hit him, and realized one thing with all her senses: he was below her.
Naruto shot out of the ground at an impossible speed, most likely because he was using super speed, and reached the Nekomata's chest cavity before she could move.
However, just as his clawed hand was inches away from piercing her chest cavity, a medium-sized clay bird 5 meters below him exploded, knocking Naruto off of Nibby as she was able to flee the vampiric demon. Nibby panted as she looked at the explosion from where she was. It had taken some energy to beat Shukaku, but she never expected it to be this difficult to beat a vampire. It was as if she was fighting one of the past vampire lords, since no vampire had become overly powerful in ages, besides Rayne herself made sure of that. She didn't want another takeover to happen again, so she did everything she could to prevent it. Nibby closed her eyes and began to concentrate her energy at the center of her forehead, revealing a crimson third eye. Rayne is going to kill me for this, but there is no other way to stop him. I have to use the Zetsumigan. Naruto emerged from the ground crater created by the explosion, looking at Nibby with rage in his eyes before smirking devilishly at her. Damn it. How do I beat this guy? He knows all my moves, he knows what I'm going to do ahead of time, and he even knows the moves I can't even use yet. This is fucking ridiculous, said Naruto, his face flushed with frustration. Perhaps I should have just ambushed you. Dark Naruto chuckled at Naruto's thoughts, causing Naruto to growl deep in his throat. This is not enjoyable. I'm just beating you down while you can't even hit me once. That is simply embarrassing. Naruto growled deeply in his throat at Dark's response and lunged at him, earning a punch to the gut and a spinning jump kick to his left temple. He flew through the air for a few seconds before slamming into the wall, creating a small crater. Shaking his head as he glared at Dark, he placed his hand on the edge of the crater to lift himself out of it. Dark Naruto slammed him back into the crater as his hand gripped his face, smirking evilly as he lifted his hand back and began to pummel Naruto in the crater, making it larger with each strike. Gritting his teeth, Naruto tried to resist the assault, but he was gradually succumbing to the darkness with each painful strike. No. I must not succumb. I need more power, he said. Dark backed up, believing he had finished Naruto, and was about to walk up and throw Naruto in the cage when his eyes widened in surprise as Naruto slowly stood up from the crater, his knees trembling from the stress and pain they were in. Dark gritted his teeth and grabbed Naruto's forehead before slamming him back into the crater and continuing his onslaught on Naruto. I can't give up because my friends and family rely on me, and I need more power. Nibi concentrated what was left of her Yuki to her eye as she stared at Naruto, before breathing deeply for one last attack and announcing it, praying to God that nothing would get in the way. Yami Enku. Dorigan no Yami Enku. She exhaled, and a large dragon made of black flames shot out of her mouth, engulfing him before he could move. Nibi sighed sadly as she reverted to her regular form, staring at the burning black flames, indicating that Naruto's body had survived the initial attack, otherwise the flames would have mostly evaporated and there would be nothing left but ash. She sighed again, knowing she would be severely punished for killing Naruto, but it had to be done seeing the insanity in his eyes, and she hoped Rayne would agree. As she turned away from the flames, they erupted, spreading across the field, and in the center of them was one enraged S-ranked vampire glaring at Nibi with overwhelming rage in his eyes. That's not possible, even Kyuubi was hurt by that attack. It didn't even leave a burn mark on him. This isn't possible. Anything less than an SS rank vampire or demon should have been turned to ashes. So how is he still standing? Nibi exclaimed as she spun around in shock, her eyes widening in fear. She was so taken aback that she didn't even notice him move. Naruto rushed up to her and grabbed her neck, Nibi's eyes widening as she struggled to get free as he lifted her off the ground. From the sidelines, the Kazekage rushed over to assist, while Deidara rushed his clay molding, both hoping to stop Naruto's terrifying power. I hope your blood is as feisty as you are, Naruto smirked gleefully at the terrified Nibi's face. Her eyes widened as she struggled to free herself from his grip as he opened his mouth, revealing his fangs. She struggled on, but it seemed futile as he bit into her collarbone, removing almost all of her Yuki. As he began to drain her blood, the Nekomata let out an ear-splitting scream that could be heard for 20 miles. Naruto could feel the darkness creeping up on him again as his eyelids began to flicker and close. Sorry everyone, I failed. I didn't have enough power to win. Another presence entered his mind as he was thinking this. Foolish mutt. Get the hell up and fight. Naruto's eyes widened as he heard Nibi's voice in his head. She's right. I have to fight back. Even if I die, he won't take over, he thought. As Dark threw another punch at Naruto, Naruto easily grabbed his fist, stunning Dark. An eerie light green aura began to surround him as he slowly lifted himself from the crumbling crater. The green aura increased rapidly around him as it destroyed enough of the crater to allow him to completely stand. Dark stumbled back from the blow and looked up at the glowing Naruto, who was looking at him with nothing but hope and determination, his eyes widening as Naruto spoke with an intensity few could ever match. I will win, Naruto said. I will not give up. I will not disappoint my friends and family. I will success. Dark's white face began to pale as he backed away from Naruto as the green aura around him exploded around him with an intensity that few living creatures could match. It's not possible. He's tapping into his full power, Dark said. Naruto extended his right arm out, and a ball of pure Yuki began to form in his palm. Dark turned back to see Kyuubi, Rayne, Itachi, Jiraiya, Nibi, Yugito, and Gobi holding him down. Dark's eyes widened as he was startled by this, and he returned to a grinning Naruto. Everything revolves around me in here. I am God in here. The green Rasengan in Naruto's hand doubled and tripled in size before Naruto rushed him and rammed it into Dark Naruto's chest, torn to shreds by the giant green Rasengan until nothing was left of him. Naruto dropped to all fours and panted heavily, completely exhausted. He looked up and smiled a little, thinking it was over when Dark Naruto's voice was heard all around the room. You may have won this round, King. But I will return. Dark's laugh grew louder and louder with each passing second until it completely stopped, and Naruto sighed in relief. Well, it's over for now. I'll deal with you later when you appear again, he said. Nibi was clutching Naruto's hair, attempting to pull him off, but had no luck as her strength was all but drained. Her face was becoming paler by the second as her blood was being drained, but she noticed it was slowly and rapidly. She also noticed Naruto's eyes had returned to their normal red and green color before he was knocked to the ground by a red-headed figure. She collapsed to the ground, clutching her neck where Naruto bit her, and looked up to see Rayne's back as she gazed at Naruto's form. Nibi smiled briefly before collapsing from exhaustion and blood loss. Rayne stared coldly at the Naruto in front of her, knowing this wasn't the real him, until she noticed his eyes had returned to normal. What occurred? Naruto said in a less frightening tone of voice, but it was still not his normal one, before passing out from mental stress and pain in his body. Rayne sighed as she noticed the sun rising, mentally cursing, and noticing the cage running towards them. Once the cage arrived, she spoke as she pointed to the rising sun, "We need shelter now." Bufu was about to respond when he noticed her finger and the sun rising, and he nodded to avoid invoking her wrath. "Alright, follow me." Rayne nodded slightly as she picked up Naruto, who had reverted to his normal form, and was about to follow Bufu when she turned to Gobi and said, "Gobi, pick up Nibi and take her to the mansion." Rayne sighed deeply as they walked into the gates, Tamari and Kankuro carrying Gaara behind them. Gobi snarled but did as she was told because Nibi was the only Biju she could tolerate. I hope something like this never happens again, Rayne thought as she followed the cage. I will tell leader of this. He must know. Two crimson eyes with three tomos surrounding the pupil stared at the scene, anger written on his face.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.